Everyone I've ever met who's a horror fan seems to have sort of a 50-50 sort of reaction to the 2001 release called Jeepers Creepers. Some people love the film for what it is, some people think it's just okay, others understandably can't bring themselves to view it objectively thanks to the extremely dubious past of its writer and director Victor Salva. For those who are unfamiliar with the premise, here's a brief rundown of Jeepers Creepers. Two siblings, named Trish and Derry, are driving home for spring break when they run afoul of an overly aggressive motorist in a truck. After witnessing the driver disposing of what looks to be a dead body, Trish and Derry become convinced that he is in fact a murderer and start trying to find evidence of his crimes. To their horror, they discovered that he is in fact more than a garden variety serial killer. He is a monstrous entity called the Creeper, who wakes from hibernation every 23 years to feast on human flesh for 23 days straight before going back to sleep. And Trish and Derry are forced to try and find a way to survive this ravenous monster that seems to be unstoppable. The film was a part of that crop of early 2000s horror films that intentionally turned the great classic horror tropes and cliches on their head and rarely had a happy ending. Basically, horror in the early 2000s and beyond were just looking to purposely upset the status quo and bring in newer and younger audiences attracted to that sort of thing. But little did I know at the time when I first watched Jeepers Creepers that it bore parallels to a horrifyingly true story that occurred in my home state of Michigan. The date was April 15th, 1990. The place was a lonely stretch of road about 12 miles away from Coldwater, Michigan. Ray and Marie Thornton were driving along and happily playing a game where they would try to spot unique license plates when all of a sudden, a van aggressively came barreling up behind them, very nearly running them off the road. While understandably shaken by the near miss, the Thorntons simply let the van pass them on the road and continued on their way. Although Marie did note that the van's license plate began with the letters GZ. Several miles down the road, the Thorntons were passing by the abandoned 1908 District School No. 3 when they spotted a frightening sight. They saw the van that very nearly ran them off the road parked near the back of the building with its rear doors open. The driver, a very creepy looking man, was lifting an item out of the van that Ray and Marie would later describe as looking like a blood-stained sheet. The man lifting the bundle had spotted the couple, and knowing that he knew that they had seen him, they decided to quickly leave the area. But the ordeal was far from over. Shortly after leaving the abandoned school in their rearview mirror, the Thorntons were quite startled to see the van speeding down the road behind them. Eventually, the van was following so close behind it very nearly crashed into their rear bumper. The Thorntons were unsure of what to do, so they just floored it in an effort to get away from their pursuer. For several miles, a tense chase ensued, and the Thorntons were frantically hoping to come across a police officer or someone that could help them, when suddenly, Ray decided to pull off the highway. The van pulled over to the side of the road and did not follow them any further. While they were understandably frightened by what had just occurred, Ray and Marie decided that they needed to get back on the highway to see if they could find the van again in order to get the full license plate number. They did indeed see the van again. However, the driver was already at work removing the license plate, and as the couple passed him, they noticed that the van's passenger side door was heavily spattered with blood. Managing to summon up their courage, the couple made the decision to head back to the abandoned school to confirm what they had seen earlier. Arriving back at the abandoned school, Marie parked the car near the rear of the building, and while the van was nowhere in sight, Ray demanded that Marie stay in the car while he investigated the area behind the building. He found the bloodstained blanket that he had seen the driver disposing of and frantically made his way back to the car, where he and Marie quickly left to find a phone and contact the police. If this chain of events sounds oddly familiar, that's because it eerily mirrors the opening sequence of Jeepers Creepers, where Trish and Derry are chased by the Creeper in his truck. Only this situation actually happened, and it was 11 years prior to the film's release. However, unlike the film where Trish and Derry learned the horrifying truth about the Creeper and the 600 plus bodies to his credit thanks to his quarter-century snack runs, the real-life conclusion to Ray and Marie's nightmarish Sunday drive is a bit more somber and grounded in tragic reality. Thanks to Ray and Marie's tip, the Michigan State Police arrived at the abandoned school and immediately cordoned it off as an active crime scene, where they found the bloodstained blanket, which they then booked in as evidence. The very next day, a road worker would discover a woman's body in a ditch on a remote road somewhere between Coldwater and the abandoned school. She had been severely beaten and shot in the back of the head. The woman would be identified as 48-year-old Marilyn Dupuy from Coldwater, who had disappeared a day earlier under rather frightening circumstances. A successful high school counselor and devoted mother, Marilyn Dupuy was well-liked and admired by almost all who knew her. Despite having a rewarding career and raising 3 children whom she loved very much, Marilyn's life wasn't exactly what she would describe as being an entirely happy one, mostly due to her marriage to 46-year-old property assessor Dennis Dupuy. Outwardly, the couple seemed fairly happy, but in reality, Dennis was an incredibly obsessive and domineering individual who sought to control every aspect of Marilyn's life, and after their kids were born, his controlling nature only got worse. After 18 years of marriage, Marilyn had decided that enough was enough and divorced him. While she had gained ownership of the family home as well as primary custody of their children, Marilyn was still bombarded by Dennis's attempts to control her life. A horrible situation that would soon end badly for her. On the morning of that Easter Sunday in 1990, Dennis had arrived at the home to pick up his 3 children for his authorized bi-weekly visitation. However, the children were highly reluctant to go with their father as they usually were, which greatly enraged Dennis, who believed that Marilyn had gone to great lengths to turn the children against him. This started a vicious argument between the embattled former spouses. Both screamed at one another in front of the children who were helplessly watching on. At some point in the argument, Marilyn must have said something that Dennis didn't want to hear, because according to statements from the 3 children, he snapped, shoved Marilyn to the floor, and then began to inflict a savage beating upon her. The children pleaded for Dennis to stop, but instead he just kept on throwing punches. The eldest daughter fled to a neighbor's house to call the sheriff's department, but by the time she got back outside, her father had already loaded her mother up into the passenger seat of his van and was speeding away. Apparently he told the children still in the house that he was taking her to the hospital to get help, but we sadly know how she ended up, don't we? Later that afternoon, the Thorntons would spot Dennis Dupuy disposing of evidence behind the abandoned school on their fateful Sunday drive, and he would briefly pursue and terrorize the potential witnesses. While we'll never know for sure what was going through his mind as he chased down Ray and Marie in his van, or what he was planning to do if he caught them, it's clear that whatever courage he may have had quickly evaporated and he switched to running away. The blood on the blanket recovered from the crime scene would be confirmed to be Marilyn's, and tire tracks left behind by the van that chased the Thorntons would be confirmed to match the tires on Dennis's van. Combined with the statements from the Thorntons and from Marilyn's children, all the evidence pointed to Dennis Dupuy being her killer. And he was now in the wind. Months after the murder of Marilyn, her friends and family would receive a handful of letters from Dennis where he squarely put the blame on her, claimed that she had ruined his life, and stated that killing her was justified. His final letter that ran for 13 pages and 5,000 words ended with, quote, "An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a lie for a lie, a life for a life. I realize that vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, but sometimes the Lord is busy doing other things." Unquote. After the letters stopped coming, there was no sign of Dennis for quite some time, almost as if he had dropped off the face of the earth. That was until March 20th, 1991, when a popular TV show would help bring the violent fugitive to justice. Unsolved Mysteries, hosted by Robert Stack, had broadcast an episode that covered the murder of Marilyn and included a recreation of the terrifying roadside encounter between Dennis and the Thorntons. It should be noted that this particular recreation is the strongest proof that exists to indicate that the opening sequence of Jeepers Creepers was inspired by these events, although writer and director Victor Salva insists that it's merely a coincidence. While Dennis Dupuy, living under the assumed name Hank Queen, was at his girlfriend Mary's house just outside of Dallas, Texas, when he saw the Unsolved Mysteries episode, and he panicked. He hastily packed a bag and told Mary that he had to go out of town to visit his sick mother before driving off in his van. While soon after, a friend of Mary's who had also seen the Unsolved Mysteries episode immediately recognized Hank as being Dennis Dupuy and called the show's tip line, even providing the license plate number of his van. Unsolved Mysteries passed that information on to the authorities, who then put out a bolo on Dupuis' van, and less than 4 hours later, he was spotted by Louisiana State Troopers crossing the Mississippi state line. This led to a hair-raising 15-minute-long chase, where Dupuis plowed through 2 police barricades before having his rear tires shot out, which brought the chase to an end. Immediately after his van was disabled, Dupuis brought out a gun and briefly exchanged gunfire with the police, before finally turning the gun on himself and pulling the trigger. And so it was that around 4 a.m. on March 21st, 1991, that the man who committed the crime that partially inspired Jeepers Creepers had finally met his well-deserved demise. Maybe it's a bit cold to think that way, but far less cruel than forcing 3 innocent children to watch as he viciously took their mother from them just because he lost his influence over them. So the only question that remains is this: was the beginning of Jeepers Creepers inspired by the tragic circumstances and aftermath of the murder of Marilyn Dupuis? Or is it nothing more than a huge coincidence? Well, in the immortal words of Nero Wolfe, quote, "In a universe that operates largely at random, coincidences are to be expected, but any one of them must always be mistrusted." If you like this video, please show your support by dropping a comment below, hitting the like button, and sharing it with your friends. If you're curious about my future content and want to hear more creepy tales, then please subscribe to my channel and hit the little bell icon so you'll be notified whenever I upload something new. Until next time, have a lovely day, stay safe out there, and most importantly,
stay creepy.